Hi guys, I had a lot of fun making a 1 hour video where I just talked about books that I'd read last month. I had a blast making it. I thought it was so much fun. And in the spirit of wanting to do more on camera and find new ways of organizing my thinking, I thought, pop culture, baby. So my last video was about books as a medium and reading them and what I liked. This video is about probably the piece of entertainment media that's most frustrated me in the last month. So let's talk about Aliens Earth. Spoiler warning, spoiler warning, spoiler warning. If you haven't seen it, don't watch this. Click off, go away. But if you don't care about spoilers or you have watched it and you have thoughts about it, stay put, stay put. Happy to have you. So Alien Earth is we're just gonna have neighborhood soundtrack, I guess. That's fine. So Alien Earth is a TV series that is part of the Alien franchise, famous science fiction and space horror franchise. I think it is the first TV series within this franchise world. I could be wrong about that. I haven't fact checked myself. I'm just talking about how I feel about it. I have not done any research for this. I'm just yapping. I've now watched it. I was excited to watch it. I think some of the Alien movies are some of the best and most iconic space horror and science fiction films ever made, and some of it is pure trash. So bad, so bad, and yet there's so much about the franchise and the world building that I genuinely like. So I wanted to watch Alien Earth. The basics are this: there's the A plot. In the A plot, a narcissistic and an obnoxious boy genius, billionaire, trillionaire tech guy, who's in charge of a lot of stuff, and I'll come back to that. But his project, what he's doing in this series is he has funded and has organized and has orchestrated a research experiment to upload human consciousness into synthetic humanoid bodies. Classic staple of this franchise in this world. There are such things as synthetic people that are robotic. They're artificial people. They are created and deployed to do specific jobs within this universe. This tech billionaire, trillionaire, whatever, is investing in and developing this technology for a few reasons that get teased out in the show, but the simplest boiled down one is he's trying to create a product that sells functional immortality. So the great question that he's trying to solve is, can you upload human consciousness into a synthetic body, which is more durable, could live forever, so long as the battery doesn't run out, whatever. Plot A. Plot B is classic Aliens movie. It's space horror. It's the xenomorph is hunting a crew on a spaceship. And of course, again, classic Aliens. Part of the world building backstory is that the company that owns this ship is purposefully trying to get these alien life forms, including the xenomorph, back to Earth for unspecified profitable reasons. I've always felt that the potential business plan of the Aliens franchises, the companies that look at this horrific space monster and yeah, we can make money off of that, have always been the weakest plot point of the series, but it's always been intentionally the weakest plot point of the series. It's so dumb. How are you going to make money off this thing? We don't know, but we're all committed to the bit. So it's a bad idea, but it's an intentional bad idea, you know? And the premise of the show is that in the B plot, you know, the ship has been fatally compromised and is on a crash landing course with Earth and is going to interact with the characters and the world building set by plot A. In the first episode, this spaceship crashes down into Earth. Events ensue. Now, the reason this piece of entertainment is the piece of media that has frustrated me the most in recent memory is because there's actually a lot to like in the world building, in the premise, in the table setting. There's so many interesting, genuinely fascinating science fiction and speculative fiction concepts. There are interesting design decisions, beautiful creation. There's beautiful production work that has gone into this series. And I think it's important to kind of acknowledge the positivity straight off the bat. And I gotta be clear, I like so many of the premises in this series. I like the retrofuturism of the aliens world. The way the design of the movies and the show shows us technology that is far beyond our capabilities now, but still has limitations. You know, it still looks old to us in some way. I really like how in the world of the show, space travel takes time. You know, they haven't necessarily solved faster than light travel or anything like that. They haven't hand waved that away as a lot of science fiction does. It's an actual premise of the world and the world building. People who engage in space travel are literally trading off. They're selling years of their lives and labor to the company that owns these ships. And that's brought up in the movies and the show. You know, one of the characters at one point talks about how by the time he gets back to Earth, his wife is going to be a grandmother, you know, because he will have sold 65 years of his life, most of which he spends, you know, I think in cryosleep, but that the economic structures of this world puts people out of time sync with one another. Genuinely interesting, really cool. I like in the aliens world how the tech on the ships that we see are so out of step with the tech on Earth, because again, in this premise, you've sent a ship off into space for up to a century of round trip travel. Well, technology is going to continue to develop on Earth. Politics is still going to happen on Earth. Culture is still going to happen on Earth. So whatever you send off is, by the time it gets back, is going to be fundamentally out of date. And that's always been built into the design of the alien movies. And it's very much built into this show. What's happening up on the spaceship is grittier and older and clunkier than the technology you see on Earth, because, you know, they would have gone off because the technology on the ship was probably cutting edge when it was launched into space, but by the time it gets back, Earth has moved on. Earth is shinier and more interesting. And yet in the whole aliens world, you know, there's, you know, future technology, but the platforms and the interfaces are still buttons and knobs and flashing lights, you know, in that, you know, kind of old school sci-fi. I love that design. I think it's interesting. That is retrofuturism done really, really, really well. I kind of brushed past this, but again, there's so many premises in this that science and speculative fiction are the best genre of media to explore. You know, what technology looks like in the future, obviously, but also how that technology is shaping culture back and shaping people back. That's one of the fundamental tensions of the show. We'll get into this more and more, but some of the table setting, you know, the world building is so cool. Like, the governments of the world have all effectively crumbled, and now we're dealing with companies owning everything. It's like an end result of capitalism. It's an end result of techno-libertarianism. 5 companies run everything. They are the new form of government. And the way that they run the world and the way that they engage with one another are not so much as nation states clashing as CEOs clashing with one another. And that's, again, a premise that's built into the show in some really cool ways. Also, I've got to be really clear, I think there's really, really good acting in this show. And there's different kinds of acting based on the premises. Some of the characters are synthetic. They are not and have never been human, but they are extremely humanoid, and they're designed to do certain jobs for certain people. Timothy Olyphant is in it, and he does acting as a synthetic incredibly well. He is robotic and mechanical and non-emotional and hyperlogical in some really, really interesting ways. It's not a bland performance from him, I didn't find. Also, again, we'll get into this more, but the consciousness that is being uploaded from a person into a synthetic body, they're doing this with children. And the idea is that they're uploading children's consciousness into adult bodies. That's interesting, but that means that in the acting, you're seeing adults having to act as children. And I think that most of the actors really, really nailed it. And they give this really interestingly discordant performance where you see physical adults speaking and acting and behaving as children would. And I think they nail it. I think they do a really good job. Honestly, I think that some of the acting is better than the written material the actors were given to work with. Something else that I like about this show, and I mean this so sincerely, is that it is self-aware about the kind of genre that it's going for. It's going for, space horror and science fiction, and there are certain tropes in that world. And this show could have shied away from them or, done those tropes, but in a way that's tired and boring. But in a few really important ways, they lean in, and I think it's smart. One of the main characters of the show is this boy genius. His name is Boy Cavalier. And there is a trope in science fiction and media of, the narcissistic child genius who is emotionally stunted, but, overly brilliant and has, it is a Peter Pan character. He's someone whose brilliance and or wealth that comes along with that brilliance, wealth and power, keeps him from actually growing up and being a fully realized character. That's an established trope. It's also something of the reality that we find ourselves living in 2025, but that's neither here nor there. What I liked about the show is that the show goes, yep, you're right, he's a Peter Pan character, and you know what? We're gonna make that a plot point. Have fun with it. Have fun with it. If you have access to Disney's IP legally, my God, lean in. So the way that works in this world is that Boy Cavalier, his private island is called Neverland, and he's named all of the children involved in his experiment after characters in the series or the children's book Peter Pan. And he's frequently reading from that book at different points in the movie. And again, it could have been subtext, the boy who never grew up, but they just went, nah, man, it's text. and I like that. If you're going to lean into tropes, do it in a self-aware way. I like that. I love the world building. I love the idea of we have achieved the techno-libertarian dream. I mean, it's dark, but it's cool. We don't have governments anymore. We have 5 corporations that have risen past the level of governments and superseded them. And the way that these organizations interact with each other is the way that companies do, not the way that, traditional nation states do. So there's a huge premise of the way that the two antagonistic CEOs of the main company engage with one another is through lawyers because they're suing one another for access to, research material, i.e. the xenomorphs and other alien life forms that are being brought back to Earth. The claim is that, that is our intellectual property and you have stolen it and we're going to sue you about it. I think that's cool. That's a cool concept to actually world build around and say, hey, how would this look? What would this mean? How would the world function? And I think they mostly nail that. I thought it was really well done. Another premise that I really, really like, and I think that they execute well throughout the series, is the problem of, well, not the problem, the concept of childhood v adulthood, and how it's not a binary thing. It's not one day you're a child and one day you're an adult. There are steps along the way. There's multiple phases of puberty. There are experiences that you have that help you transition from being a child to an adult. So what would the implications be to create beings that have done this jump one day to another? They've gone from a child personality and consciousness into an adult human body without having experienced puberty, without having gone through any of the hormones or the emotional swings, without having experienced the physicality of a growth spurt, without having had any of the social interactive experiences that would allow a normal person to grow into that body. You've just gone from A to B. I think that's interesting. And I think that the acting in particular explores this, what it's like to have functionally children, but that are physically presenting as adults, and how that discordance makes them see the world that they're dealing with and the people around them in a more simplistic, childlike way, married to very real capabilities around violence and action in the world that's more on par with adult physicality. I think it's really cool. I also like that this is explicit in the show because in addition to having like programmers and people who are looking after the children's synthetic bodies, one of the main characters is a psychologist, someone who, does therapy with them and is interested in it, in researching it, and is invested in their emotional well-being because her view, the character's view, is that, they are still children and she has to help them along the process to still becoming an adult. And she's the only one who thinks that way. She sees them as emotional children and she feels protective towards them, whereas other characters see them quite literally as intellectual property. Or, again, as more of a scientific prototype, something that is more mechanical. So again, that premise, really cool. Like it. What do I not like about this show? I'm going to start with like smaller themes and then I'm going to build up to the big one. One of the things that I really dislike most about this series is how many aspects of it relies on the concept of the idiot plot. The idiot plot is when normal basic competence is just gone. It's just thrown out. This is everywhere in this series and it just bugs the hell out of me. In order for the story to continue, in order for an action to happen, in order for things to move forward, someone has to be an idiot. Someone has to be just dumb. Someone has to behave in ways that are hilariously, ludicrously dumb. Often in ways that don't make sense with their character. They just have to be dumb in order for the plot to work. The most egregious examples of this for me are actually on the ship, on the Maginot. In order for almost all of the events that happen on the ship that release the alien life into the wild, they require genuinely astonishing levels of incompetence from multiple people. Like, multiple people have to make life-changingly bad, dumb decisions or mistakes in order for this to happen. and most of them are women. And that vexes me. So for example, in order for the lab leaks to happen, the doctor who is studying the specimens has to, at multiple points, fail to contain the specimen that she's working on, i.e. she has to leave a shutter open at one point that allows one species out in the wild. And at another point, she has to fail to lock in a specimen sample into its secure holding in the right way. And it's just like, really, twice in 10 minutes? Is she an idiot? Well, she has to be in order for either of these creatures to break out. It just has to be done. Otherwise wouldn't work. Idiot plot. There's also an idiot subplot where one of the children characters wants to be a scientist, and he's interested in science, and that's kind of his main, motivation. He wants to be a help in the lab. He wants to learn. He wants to be doing things. And his character is put forward is that he's a very thoughtful, conscientious person who takes doing science correctly very seriously. And he takes the responsibility that comes from building a relationship with another synthetic who oversees the lab very seriously. He wants to be this guy's right-hand man. He takes orders from this man and he executes them to the letter. Except this one time, he is left alone to tend the lab. He is given very explicit instructions about following protocol, which we know he takes seriously. And then, of course, he breaks protocol and all hell breaks loose. It doesn't match with his character. It doesn't match with the writing, where he has just been briefed on this. He has shown no evidence of being an idiot or incompetent. But in order for the plot to move forward, this thoughtful, careful, competent person has to make dumb mistakes. Back on the Maginot, once the xenomorph has broken out, the acting captain, who is of course female, is routinely paralyzed with indecision in a way that didn't seem to make sense with the initial writing that the actor had to deal with, and then just again required this character to routinely shut down or clam up in ways that just didn't seem believable with the writing or the acting the way it was set up. She had to be an idiot. She had to be fundamentally incompetent for the role in order for the plot to progress. And I don't like it. If your plot relies on idiot plot devices, you need to do better writing. I'm sorry. You just do. Not everyone can be this dumb this consistently. Do better. Ooh, one of the big ones, one of the biggest things that irritated me. I ranted to Jeff for 20 minutes about this. I mentioned that in this corporate world where we're not dealing with countries at war, we're dealing with companies. There's a whole plot point about how Company A is claiming that the crashed Maginot and the specimens aboard are their property, and the other company is going, nuh-uh, finders keepers. And it is explicitly shown that Boy Cavalier bribed someone on the Maginot to sabotage it in order to crash. And this is never brought up ever again. And it's not brought up in the context of the legal disagreement, i.e., if we're engaging in lawfare, one person is saying, this is mine, Boy Cavalier is saying, nah, it's mine. It would make sense for the first company to go, oh, but you intentionally sabotage it in order for it to crash in your territory so that you could claim it. We have that evidence. And one of the characters literally in the room has that evidence, and it never comes up. It never comes up. So again, you've created this world where corporate lawfare is a thing. You've created the evidence, and then you do nothing with it. It doesn't matter. The whole, the justification for the crash doesn't go anywhere. We don't do anything with it. It's so frustrating, and it doesn't make sense in this techno corporate libertarian world where lawfare is the primary way that these companies are interacting with each other. You've created a whole subplot of an intentional sabotage, and it doesn't matter. Why? All over this series, like when they film on the Neverland Private Island Research Facility, it's made abundantly clear that this thing is like covered in cameras. There's not an inch of it that's not under surveillance. And yet, at multiple points, people or characters are sneaking around in ways that are not feasible with the setup and the set building and other plot points that rely heavily on this surveillance technology. So it just goes back and forth at the convenience of the plot. Sometimes people are heavily monitored and sometimes they're not for no really good reason. Something else that I didn't like is that I didn't like that the xenomorph, the canonical big bad of the Alien franchise, the perfect organism, the apex predator, the creature, the being that everybody and their dog is spending billions, if not trillions of dollars to obtain, again, for totally unspecified reasons, but whatever. This perfect creature, this perfect antagonistic monster is defeated multiple times in this show, like really easily. I don't like it. That bothers me. If you're gonna do space horror, then the monster matters. And in the Alien franchise, I'd argue, the xenomorph matters. The xenomorph is the canonical big bad. It is the being that haunts and hunts throughout the entire series. The weakest elements of the Alien franchises are when the xenomorph is either sidelined or, done dirty. And they were done dirty in this series. It shouldn't be that easy to stun them. It shouldn't be that easy to defeat them. It shouldn't be that easy to decapitate them. But it is, like time and time again. It's not quite an idiot plot, but it frustrates me. I don't like it. I get that the series is trying to do, but humans are the real monsters, which is of course a classic sci-fi trope, but no, in Aliens, the xenomorph is the monster. And the problem with humans is the hubris of trying to contain it. So you gotta have you gotta have your big bad be bigger and badder than it is in this series. I was disappointed. I want better for my poor evil little darling. Ultimately, what is so frustrating about the show is that the premises it does its world building on, it establishes its plot on, it does its character building on, are so strong. And yet time and time and time again, it just doesn't do anything with them. There's so much planting and there is not nearly enough payoff. The coolest and biggest premise for me of this show is the inherent conflict between personhood being something that is conscious and intellectual and something that is embodied. What makes a human? Is it one? Is it the other? Is it a combination of the two? That is such a cool thing to explore. And the show does some really interesting things with it, but it also just drops the ball on it in some really, really frustrating ways. Let me give you some examples. One of the things that I hated most in this series is part of B-plot, the ship in space. There is a synthetic on board that is a deeply creepy and pervy character. It is an element of his character that he is creeping on a female co-worker. And there's a lot of lingering shots of him staring down at her, in her underwear, in her cryo chamber. And, other people comment on how creepy he is around her. And it's just, he's a creeper. He's a creeper character. But he's synthetic. He's not real. He's not a hybrid. He doesn't have human consciousness, but somehow he's developed sexual desire. Not just sexual, malicious sexual desire. That's so interesting. What are you going to do with that? Nothing. Girl, give us nothing. I'm not opposed to creepiness in media, but I need it to serve a purpose. I need it to, if you're going to spend this much time on it, if you're going to make it this prominent in your plot, it has to do something. It has to mean something. It has to bring something forward. Otherwise, it's just more grossness about or towards women for no reason. Does not advance the plot, does not teach us anything new about these beings. It just raises a bunch of questions, does nothing with them. Another example of this that I thought was so cool, like the place setting was so cool, was the character Nibs, who experiences what is effectively a hysterical pregnancy. She thinks that she's pregnant. Now again, Nibs is a child, mentally, psychologically. And Nibs is also a synthetic body. She can't be pregnant. She doesn't have the equipment. She doesn't have the parts. And yet, her brain tells her that she's pregnant. Hysterical pregnancy is a real thing that happens to real people. You know, it is something that appears in neuroscience and it appears in psychology. Like there are famous examples of people who experience hysterical pregnancy. They convince themselves that they're pregnant. What an interesting idea. What an interesting idea for a person who is mentally human but physically can't be pregnant to be experiencing this when your body and your brain are so massively out of alignment with one another. Because hysterical pregnancy is already bonkers. Your brain and your body are already out of alignment, but that means so much more when the body is synthetic, when it isn't real. What a cool idea. What are we going to do with this? What they do with it is that they treat Nibs's claim to be pregnant as an example of her malfunctioning. And so they reset her. They wipe a week's worth of her memories away because they determine that this hysterical pregnancy is the result of trauma that she experienced. And they're like, all right, cool, let's just wipe it. Let's just get rid of the trauma. And again, that is a really cool idea because we can't do that with people. You can't do that with people, but you can do it with computer programs, right? So again, is she a person or is she fake? Is she a computer program that can be wiped? But the excuse is that she's experiencing human emotional trauma. What an interesting idea. What are we going to do with that? Not much. What they do with it is that Nibs is re-traumatized by finding out that they've done this to her, and then commits a bunch of violence about it, and then gets shot. That's what they do with it. Now, this isn't an idiot plot point, but it is idiot plot adjacent, and that's the problem of characterization. And when kind of like when the plot holes happen just to move the story forward, it is so deeply annoying when you write or when you conceptualize an interesting character with an interesting inner world or conflict and then just have them throw it all away, again, just to advance the plot point. This is everywhere in the show. The most egregious example is the psychiatrist or psychologist who is responsible for taking care of the children. And she takes her job really, really seriously. Her character is defined as thinking of them as, treating them as children still, despite the fact that they're now in human bodies. She is the character who is most sensitive to the fact that they haven't grown up yet. And they don't know how to grow up yet. And that the rest of the world is going to see them very differently than they might see themselves. This is her defining trait, this sympathy and this empathy and this commitment to good psychological care and practice, except when the plot depends that she does otherwise. So going back to the Nibs plot point, Boy Cavalier confronts his scientist to say, she's glitching. She thinks she's pregnant. Fix it, get rid of it. And the conflict is, okay, do you treat her like a machine? Do you treat her like a computer program and reset her? Which this doctor acknowledges, no, that could be bad for her. We don't know what it would do to her. It could traumatize her. But of course, then eventually she goes along with it because she is threatened that, she'll pull funding or Boy Cavalier will call the program. They attempt to portray this as kind of a maternal care of her taking care of the kids, but with everything that's been written about her, this is not a decision that her character, with her subject matter expertise and the role that she's played within the plot, this isn't a decision she would make. She wouldn't choose to do something that she thought was legitimately traumatizing. She's the only character in this series that would make that kind of line in the sand not to cross. And then she does it, because the plot has to advance. It's similar to Isaac, being an idiot when he's only ever been conscientious. No. Like the idiot plot, it is so lazy when, in order to advance the story that the narrative or the writers are trying to tell, they throw up any characterization that they have worked so hard to carefully create. And especially when they've done a good job of protecting that character or defining that character really well. Why go through the bother of writing an interesting, self-contained, internally consistent character when you're just going to throw it out to advance the plot point? It's so frustrating. There are other pockets of this sprinkled through the series too. Like, Curly is set up as someone who's trying to be Daddy's favorite. She's competing with the main protagonist, Marcy/Wendy, for Boy Cavalier's affection. She wants to be his favorite. And she is set up initially as if she would do anything to win his favor, but then doesn't take any of the actions that the plot sets her up for, including potentially selling out her comrades, of course, that would garner that favor. So she just ends up being portrayed as this ambitious, almost cutthroat or ruthless character who ends up doing nothing, and just waiting for the plot to come get her. I think the biggest frustration I had with this series is that, again, I think the premises of this series were so genuinely interesting. They raise such interesting concepts that only science fiction and speculative fiction are really equipped to confront and deal with and explore. And they just don't. So what's the point?